listening to the House by the Video Store podcast.
There's no more room in hell. The dead will walk near.
We have such sights to show you.
I kick ass for the Lord.
Praise God! Give away!
Welcome to the House by Video Store podcast. I'm your host, William, and joining me will be Sean.
Merry Christmas. This is the last one before December 25th, baby Jesus' birthday.
Or is this more commonly known, the day that you have to give gifts to people in your family and receive gifts from your family. And on this episode, we'll be discussing Silent Night, Deadly Night, the film from 1984. And I believe there was a remake, so it's not that. It's the original one.
Is the remake just called Silent Night?
I don't remember.
I don't know. I was searching it. Yeah, I have not seen the remake, though.
Yeah, so it is a film that came out. So surprisingly, Black Christmas was in the 70s, and the same director as A Christmas Story, Bob Clark. So you had like Black Christmas coming out in the 70s, and then this movie came out in the early 80s, and there was a lot of backlash to the movie. So Silent Night, Deadly Night got released in theaters. It was only in theaters for like 1 or 2 weeks before enough backlash against the idea of like a character dressed as an evil Santa killing people was such a negative idea that it got a lot of backlash. They pulled it out of the theaters after not too long, and then it just became kind of like a cult hit, but it actually performed well in its first week at the box office. But it's interesting that that movie was such like a unique thing, or such a thing that causes backlash against it. And now you can go on Amazon Prime and see one of any 50 independent horror films with Santas killing things.
Yeah.
And so what was once shocking is not shocking after you've seen it one time.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll be discussing Silent Night, Deadly Night. But before that, we can go through some brief things we've been watching just to kind of give you some recommendations or thoughts and things out there you can check out.
An update on our viewing habits, basically.
Yeah.
Which,
Yeah.
our year-end podcast is coming soon, where we do like a best of and sometimes worst of. So we'll be talking about a lot of the films from this year on that one. That'll come out probably, in about a couple weeks after this one. We'll do a podcast on Terror Train next for the New Year's Eve episode, and then we'll have...
Or the New Year's week.
Yeah, New Year's week, and we'll have an exhaustive discussion on kind of the big films of the year for the podcast after that.
Yeah. But things that I had watched. So I finished watching The Punisher on Netflix, and just, brief thoughts on that. If you're watching the show, the last few episodes do give you a lot of what you would expect out of something called The Punisher. So the last few episodes do deliver, a lot of bloodshed and gore and violence, if that's what you were looking for. And it just reiterates me how a lot of those Netflix series, at least the Marvel ones, go on, like at least 3 episodes too long. In the case of some of those Marvel series, they could all, like The Punisher could have been like 6 episodes, really. But, it's one of those shows where it wasn't something that the second it ended, I wanted to watch the next one because I was enthralled by it. It's more of I don't hate this, and there's probably good stuff coming. So I watched it. If it was something that was on a pay cable network I didn't have, that I had to pay to get, I would not have watched it. But the fact that it's on Netflix and just sitting there was something to watch during my downtime. So it was, enjoyable enough. Didn't love it, but John Bernthal plays that character very well, and it seems like they've kind of gotten it set. They announced there's gonna be a second season, so that it's kind of been set up so he kind of is in the Punisher mode. So the next season probably a lot more of what some fans wanted more of. But as it was, it focused a lot more like on PTSD and war. Which is interesting that they were such a focus on PTSD. Like, what does PTSD and normal warfare do in the face of, you see the Hulk fighting aliens and thousands of people dying in New York? Like, they didn't really touch on that. But I think that's for the better, because kind of ignoring all that stuff. Like, the Punisher is just a dude with guns. in
Stays away from the more fantastical elements of the
like
Marvel universe.
if he showed up in the Avengers, like theoretically like Black Widow or
no, what
Hawkeye,
are you doing? Don't shoot everybody.
yeah, like a bad guy comes in and is giving their monologue, and he just is across the room and just shoots him right in the head, and then everybody's like, "Why'd you do that?" And he's like, "What? The threat's over. Let's go back home." But yeah, so it was enjoyable enough. It delivered what fans would want, at least towards the end. It kind of like it opened up with a little bit of stuff because you watched the first episode. So it opened up with a little bit of like Punisher action. And then there was like action interspersed throughout the episodes. But then it really let loose like the violence in the last few episodes. And there was even like a decapitation and like character like getting disfigured pretty heavily and a lot of violence. So if that's what you're looking for, it does have that. It just comes after a lot of build up and story building and, you know, character focus.
Was he in the Defender show?
No.
Okay. Was he going to be part of that ever?
He was in season 2 of Daredevil, but I think that was just a way to introduce that character, because if he's in the Defenders, once again, somebody just shooting someone with a gun, you end the story a lot quicker.
I didn't know if he was in that. I knew he was in Daredevil, but I was just wondering if he is ever part of a team.
Maybe he'll kill Iron Fist, because that show wasn't good. But yeah, so that's out there.
Friendly fire.
Yeah.
It's a big message from a gun safety message episode of the Defenders.
But other things that I watched. So we did a video that you can check out that's on YouTube only. It's not on the podcast stream, of our discussion of Star Wars: The Last Jedi.
Or our website.
Yeah, check out our website or YouTube channel if that's not where you're listening, and you can watch, or you can hear and watch our discussion of that.
Pretty exhaustive.
Yeah, it's been a lot of time.
Not covering everything, but still,
Yeah.
it was like, almost 90 minutes or something?
Yeah, it's over an hour, so you can check that out and listen to it. But the only other thing I really had time to watch, because there's, feverishly been trying to work and get the short film finished, Twin Trees, that we worked on, that we've mentioned off and on, that was partially shot on vacation while Julie and I were in Portland and in Oregon and hiking and stuff. So it was mostly shot around in town in Portland, in this I forgot the name of it. It's like a bird sanctuary that connects to the Forest Park, with like one of the national. And then we filmed stuff at Silver Falls State Park. So there's like outdoor stuff there that's really cool. And then the rest of it is shot here back in town over the course of a couple nights. So that'll be out either by the time this is released or soon after.
Got to be before Christmas. So.
Yes, it'll be out. The latest it'll come out is Wednesday, December 20th. Hopefully you can get it out tomorrow, but that'll be coming soon. But then something else I did watch on Netflix was Alias Grace, which is another Margaret Atwood, not Margaret Thatcher, as Julie stated on the podcast months ago.
Yeah.
So the same author that did Handmaid's Tale did another story called Alias Grace, and it was based, loosely on real life events of a woman that was accused of murder and had like a trial and stuff. And that show is only 6 episodes, so a good length. It's not too long, and it doesn't waste a ton of time doing nothing. Like, everything about it is interesting, and the time period. So it's set after the American Revolution and before the Civil War, I believe. I think so. I don't remember the time period, but it's a period piece and set in Canada early on, before like modern.
Yeah. Is it kind
times.
of like, is it set in a town, or is it just kind of in a cabin in the middle of nowhere?
So it takes place in like a couple small towns, like. So the main character, Grace, is a worker in a house. So she's like one of the servants who like lives in, and she's like at 2 different places. One of them's a more isolated house that's a little bit further away from other things. And then there's one house that's like more in the kind of like city area, and it's got a few recognizable faces in it. So it's got Zachary Levi in it, who's on the show Chuck and is going to be in the new DC show Shazam, I think. And it has Anna Paquin, who was Rogue in the X-Men films and has been in a bunch of other stuff. True Blood. So it's got he's got some well-known faces. It's not horror, but the entire time, like there's some things where things feel off. and it feels unsettling, and then you're waiting for something to happen.
A little bit of dread, maybe.
Yeah, a little bit of dread. It was really good at building atmosphere, and then character interactions happen that are unsettling or just off. So you're just waiting to see what's going to happen. And even though it's not really listed as horror, like I think it is effective horror in that there is violence in it and there is stuff like that going on. But it's also a statement more about like the way men treat women and how that era worked. And so all of that in and of itself is interesting. But then you do have the elements where, what was that movie? Not that it was set like in a historical time period, but the movie I Am the Pretty Little Thing That Lives in the House that was on Netflix as a Netflix original. Like that was like a slow burn, quote unquote horror film where, in my opinion, there really wasn't any horror, nothing happening. This is more of like historical like crime drama that has horror elements to it. And I came away really enjoying it. 6 episodes, so it's not a huge investment of time. But if you enjoyed The Handmaid's Tale, I think you'll really enjoy it. Or if you just like, shows that are set in different time periods, a little bit of historical. Well, it's based on a true story, but how much of that true story is presented and how much of that story is even known. Like, I'd recommend watching the show and then going back and reading about it. Because it does take a lot of liberties and things are introduced and things like that. But, it's, an entertaining show. Like, because I watched it with Julie, like, that was a show where we actually did when an episode ended. It's like, oh, do you want to watch the next one? What time is it? Okay, let's watch it. So it's very much like that. Good. And it's something I'd recommend checking out. It's out there on Netflix, 6 episodes, Alias Grace. It's not like blood and guts and gore or ghost, but there are creepy and unsettling elements in it, and it moves along pretty quickly and, does have a lot of interesting elements. And then there's the added, bonus of it being loosely based on real events. So after it's over, you can go back and read about it and find other interesting things to talk about. And it does leave things up to interpretation when it ends. So it's one of those shows that does invite like good discussion once you've seen it. So that's something I would recommend checking out.
Yeah, when you started talking about it, I had heard about it online, but I had never seen that pop up on Netflix.
Yeah,
they have like the big advertisements. I don't know why they haven't pushed that out, but another show I still recommend is Godless.
Yeah, I've been wanting to check.
I think that show was really solid. Super enjoyed that. So was that all that you watched?
Yep.
And basically Star Wars, our takes are, I really like it. I recognize there's some flaws, but I loved it. And you are not as hot on it.
Like, I recommend it's well made, or I realize that, but to me, it just didn't stir the emotional feelings I expected to get. And it left me just kind of flat.
Did not turn on your lightsaber.
No, it is, in most it turned on halfway.
Okay. So, enough about your lightsaber. I know I brought it up. Real quick, you guys already did a podcast about this. I was not on it. Mother.
Yeah.
Finally watched that.
Darren Aronofsky.
Yeah. I think I just had our child around that time.
Yeah.
So I didn't make it to see that. Really like Black Swan. I think that film is phenomenal. Maybe it has a few flaws or whatever, but I think it is awesome. Mother, I enjoyed it. Some people really hate this film.
Yeah.
I did not really hate it. I enjoyed it. Some of the scenes I was kind of like, okay, I get the point, kind of a little bit later on in the third act. But I just enjoyed the performances in it too, if nothing else. Avery Barnum, Jennifer Lawrence, Ed Harris, Michelle Pfeiffer, among others. But I super enjoyed just kind of watching this film.
Yeah.
Some of the stuff kind of beats you over the head, and it is an allegory for, I thought one specific thing was clear, and then I was reading about it, and there are many different things.
Well, because what Aronofsky has said to me doesn't, like, what his interpretation, explanation of the film, to me really doesn't match what I took away from it, from like what you saw and what really came across to me.
Yeah.
What I took away from it was a little bit different than what he said, but it's a movie that is allegorical. If you go into it wanting, because I think the killer thing for this movie was they initially advertised it as more of like a thriller, and if somebody goes in expecting a genre thriller, then they're going to be incredibly disappointed, because that's absolutely not what it is. And it was even advertised someone as a horror film, so like a horror thriller starring Katniss Everdeen and Aunt Hanchegger and
Ed Harris
and Catwoman and Michelle Pfeiffer and Ed Harris.
Yeah.
So then you're thinking like, oh man, what's it? And then it is absolutely not a horror thriller. I mean, there's some horrific or thriller elements in it at times, but that's really not what it's about at all. It's about other things. So it's one of those movies where the discussion around it might be better than the movie for a lot of people, but that's a movie where when I saw it, people literally like were laughing at the end. It's like, well, I just wasted 2 hours and $10 on this.
Yeah, it depends on what you want to get out of movies. You know, but two, talking about Star Wars, you know, there's a lot of thematic themes in that, themes and things they explore, which I really like. And it's almost like there's a difference between something that almost has double meaning. And has a theme it's kind of stating, or certain scenes that are based on certain thematic elements. This just felt like almost a straight allegory for things. Yeah. Which sometimes is less interesting. When it feels like it's just, okay, there are different interpretations, which is cool. But if it just feels like that's all you're being told is that one thing, that it's, I don't know, there's just not as much going on.
If you strip away, so this movie does not work as a narrative film on its own. It's allegorical. So
it is almost like a poem in some ways, which Javier Bardem plays as a poet, because it is kind of just broken up into these sections almost.
So it's not really a straightforward film that you watch from point A to point B and be like, this happened, this happened, this happened. It's
and the things happen, they just don't seem that connected. Really,
well, they do happen, but it's circular and it's more like proving a point than it is telling a story.
Yeah.
So with appropriately tuned expectations, knowing what you're going for, you can enjoy it. I just think a lot of problem was that people went in expecting one thing and got something radically different. So they went in expecting to get, a nice hamburger and fries, and what they got was a very experimental fusion dish. Which may have been what they may have been okay with if they wanted that, but they wanted a hamburger, fries, and a beer, and they got something else.
We got another. MJ Jones, I think, gave us another one. What did he say? Oh, actually, he talked about Mother. He said Mother was like, you're expecting Logan, you get X-Men 3: The Last Stand. That's for you, Derek. That's interesting. I don't remember bringing up Mother on the last podcast on the Better Watch Out. It was a couple ones back, but. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, if you're expecting one thing, that's not what you're going to get. So just go in there with an open mind. It does feel closer to, I don't know, there's less going on than Black Swan, but it feels closer in that style of horror.
I think it probably more, I don't know, I think it's less Black Swan and probably more The Fountain or some of the other end of his filmography.
Yeah, it's just it's not your traditional horror film, quote unquote.
Yeah.
The Babysitter, wasn't a fan of that either. Like you guys, I was watching my daughter. She's my daughter, so I wasn't babysitting her. But I was watching my daughter, and I need to turn on something, and I knew I couldn't pay close attention to it. So to be fair, I wasn't watching it, very closely. But I just wanted to get an idea for the film to see if I was on board with it. And yeah, it didn't do much for me. It felt like it was kind of made for teenagers.
It scratches an itch for a specific subset that I think is not us.
Yeah.
I mean, there are people our age or older within, whatever age range that have enjoyed it quite a bit. Just to me, like when there's titles popping up on screen to reiterate what just happened, I forgot what some of them were, but it seemed pretty juvenile stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the titles didn't bother me as much. It was just more of a lot of the characters were...
Well, the tonal mismatch of a lot of it.
Yeah, it just wasn't...
And everything you expected to happen happened. Because like there's teenagers playing spin the bottle. I was like, oh, I know where this is going. And then it goes exactly there immediately. And
I mean, some of the characters and their performances felt straight out of like somebody's Vines or social media.
Well, like the one, I forgot what the character's name was. That was like a YouTube star, the African American character, and he did very stereotypical things that the characters did in those movies 15 years ago that I thought had kind of been progressed past.
Yeah. And I like him on social media. I think King Bach or something, but like Bella Thorne's character was
very one note.
Yeah, it's a lot of that. So I don't think it's very good.
And Samara Weaving, who is on Ash vs. Evil Dead season 1.
Oh yeah.
She was one of the leads. Once again, it's 30-year-olds playing high schoolers.
Yeah, but not really doing it to make any sort of point. It's just exactly what they're doing.
It's just like, we want this guy to be ripped and to be looking like this.
Yeah. So I watched Atomic Blonde. I know Derek was super hot on that. It didn't all work for me, and that is more of a spy thriller than an action film. I think the action sequences are amazing, and those are all incredible, but it's not a John Wick level action film where you get basically, 7 or 8 action scenes and 3 or 4 narrative exposition scenes or something. Like it's very much about the spy thriller part.
Yeah.
And I don't think that is handled well. And it's set in the 80s. It's right before the fall of the Berlin Wall, which is an interesting setting. But they rely on 80s music of that era, and it almost just feels a little, I don't know. I love the music I love the tracks in the film separately, but for some reason it feels a little hokey at times.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like they lean on that too much, and there's track after track. So it may be a fun film to just throw on, just to listen to a little bit, but I don't think it really, I don't know, it really leans hard on the style, but the substance isn't there.
Yeah.
So the music doesn't elevate it. Like something, even it opens up kind of with like the song Cat People early on, and the way Cat People is used in Inglourious Bastards is interesting and phenomenal. I think.
Yeah.
This is almost expected, it being set in the 80s, and it's not, the music isn't used in interesting ways really. It's just used a lot, and it feels like it just leans on that. So I did not like it as much as I wanted to. It's still a fine film. I recommend watching it, but don't maybe jump out and buy the Blu-ray unless you're for sure you're going to be in on it. And then I watched the Villainous, which is, I think, a South Korean action film. I thought that was stellar. The story in it is actually pretty good. I would say more than serviceable. This is an action film. It is, the action in it is incredible. It makes me question, like, okay, I think the action sequence in this are more impressive than Atomic Blonde and John Wick. Like, it is very, very good. I question how they shoot some of it. Some of it, I know that there is some mixed CGI with some green screen and stuff, but I almost don't want to look into it because it is such a spectacle.
Yeah.
And it is so amazing. And again, the story is actually pretty interesting. It's a cool little, this setup may be a little bit familiar with, as far as there being an organization that basically has some super trained killers. You know what I mean? But it goes in a totally unexpected direction with where the story goes, kind of at the halfway point. And I really, really liked it. And by the end of it, the final scene is, I think, phenomenal. Highly recommend that. I don't know where I'm going to land, though, as far as John Wick and that, as far as just straight action films out of the year. I'm going to have to watch John Wick again for sure.
John Wick.
Then I watched The Disaster Artists today, actually, which of course is James Franco directed and starred film about the making of The Room with Tommy Wiseau.
Oh, hi, Mark.
It stars all of his buddies. His brother,
Seth Rogen.
his
James
brother,
Dave Franco.
It's got a pretty good cast. It's a well-made film. I think it's good, and I think it's funny, but it's not. The Room is at a certain level, and you would hope that this would reach some, I don't know, just be able to catch some of that spark and some of that fire from that film and be elevated on at least some moments to that level.
Yeah.
And it's good. It's a solid film, but it's just not, I don't know. It's not all the way there. It's not as stunning as I was hoping it was going to be. It's funny. I laughed throughout it, but some of it is just being able to sit there and laugh at James Franco being Tommy Wiseau. And it's almost like you're getting to see more of him because it is his life and kind of how this film came about. It doesn't start with him making the film.
Yeah.
It takes a little while, and it's kind of his journey with his friend, the guy that plays Mark in the film.
Greg Sestero.
Essentially, they're like kind of become close friends.
Yeah.
And they go on this journey together. It was fascinating in that regard. I question how much is accurate, but and it doesn't seem out of place as far as the stuff that happens. It's just that is it being based on a true story. If I think most of it is accurate because it's based on the book, which I assume is accurate. But if like 90% of this is fictional, then it makes the film be a lot less interesting because if that much of it is fictional, then it should have been a better film. You know what I mean? It's one of those weird things.
Well, like, from what I read, like Tommy Wiseau just did weird stuff, and like during the movie, they're like, if he wasn't doing something weird right now, then I would be concerned.
Yes, yeah. So I definitely recommend it, but it is award season, and there's a lot of films I haven't seen out, like I, Tanya and Lady Bird. So as much as I love that crew, and I watch Neighbors 2. Like I see the films they do just because I like them. I would maybe, if your viewing options are limited, I would maybe wait for that on video. Unfortunately to say, again, I liked it a lot, but there's just a lot of really good movies out right now. If it would have been a dead season, it's releasing like a normal like year in February or March, not like they are now, I would say absolutely go see it. But there's just so much out right now that is supposed to be really good, that I think this maybe is not gonna stay with you as long as some of those other films.
So is that everything that you watched?
That's it.
Yep. So now we'll move into our discussion of Silent Night, Deadly Night from 1984. And I mean, I guess we'll have spoilers throughout. This is one of those movies that's hard to spoil, because a lot of those 80s slashers, even if you know the plot elements, there's not big twist to it. It's pretty straightforward, and it lays out what's going to happen. So basically what the movie is, and two, just to clarify, this was not on any streaming service. We just rented it. You can purchase on disc. You can rent it from Google Play or some other services or iTunes or whatever. So you can find it out there. But it is a horror, because we went back and forth on some different, Christmas-themed horror films, and something like Jack Frost is more schlock in the vein of Thanksgiving, but there's so few Thanksgiving movies, we just decided to do a goofy one. But with Christmas, there are ones that have, that are more cult hits or that have good reputations versus kind of the more schlocky recent stuff. Because there's a bunch, if you go on Amazon Prime, there's a number of different horror films that are Christmas based. There's one last year, there was like some anthology that had William Shatner in it that I watched part of and couldn't really get into. But Silent Night, Deadly Night, the basic setup for the plot is, according to IMDb, after his parents are murdered, a tormented teenager goes on a murderous rampage dressed as Santa due to his stay at an orphanage where he was abused by the Mother Superior. And so basically a young kid sees his family get killed by a Santa that had robbed a gas station when they pull over on the side of the road because his car broke down. And he shoots his dad and then like assaults his mother sexually.
It's actually a pretty effectively horrifying scene, I think, for films of this era. It was a little messed up, you know what I mean? Because it's a kid witnessing this, and you got the baby crying and all that. Like, I think that was way more effective than I was expecting out of this film.
It wasn't overly hokey. I mean, the movie itself, so a lot of slasher films from the 80s essentially break down to mostly single location movies where the kills and all that sort of set up, and there's like the mythology. Essentially all those movies, like Halloween, Friday the 13th, like a lot of these movies essentially set up some tragedy happened X number of years ago, and then somebody's out for revenge X number of years later. In this one, the twist on it a little bit is that the killer is somebody that you spend time with and see what happened to him to mold him. So then you have a little bit of sympathy for the character Billy because you see his parents murdered and his mother raped in front of him. And then he goes to an orphanage where they're really not sensitive to his needs or understand that he went through a trauma that needs to be treated with, care versus just like punishment. And so you have a little bit of that element of you see all these things that molded him into what he is.
And to the horrifying experience of his seemingly almost comatose grandfather snapping out of it and telling him that Santa comes after the bad kid.
Yeah.
Which, when they rolled up onto that, it's the first time I had watched it. I'd seen scenes of it before when editing like some videos for the site that Corey did, like some top fives. So I'd watched scrub through and watched a couple, basically looking for some good scenes, but I never saw the beginning because it just wasn't as interesting as somebody running around with an axe dressed as
Yeah.
Santa towards the end when you're editing a video, but
Well-
they pull up on that mental hospital, that mental institute or whatever,
Yeah.
mental hospital, and I thought, oh my God, another mental hospital. But thankfully they go in a little bit different direction with that, and it is basically just
Yeah, it's not that the person in the institution causes or is the one who does the murders. It's that a grandfather in the institution leaves like a lasting message with the kid that when he grows up that he recognizes. And
so it was
so
a quick setup and payoff there.
Yeah.
for that scene.
Yeah, so Billy's grandfather tells him that Santa comes for the bad boys or the bad kids, bad boys and girls. And then he sees his parents, you know, his dad get gunned down and his mom assaulted by Santa. So that just reinforces to him that Santa does bad things. And then he's working at a department store leading up to Christmas, and they're unaware of his trauma. And when the person that's supposed to play Santa can't make it into the store, they then have Billy don the costume, despite the fact that other people probably could have played it better than him, just by virtue of being a little bit older and like the store owner being like a little bit chubbier than him.
He was FNG. Fucking new guy.
Oh.
So they're like, hey, you're being Santa.
Yeah, but I mean, really, in the scheme of things, like that could be bad, but at the same time, that could be less work than some of the
Yeah.
other stuff.
Yeah.
But so he, you know, works at a really crappy department store, the type of store that doesn't exist in today's world for the most part, kind of seemingly like a more small chain with a limited number of employees.
Yeah, it just seemed like a
Now you
toy shop
see,
almost.
now you have all the big mega stores, but
And I think that's run by, I guess, Britt Leach. I had to look up his character name. He doesn't have a picture on IMDb, but he's an older actor who I've seen in a ton of stuff.
yeah.
I guess Father the Bride was the last thing he was in, but he was uncredited in that. But yeah, I think he was great in this. He was a
Yeah.
nice little bonus character actor that popped up in it.
Well, and two, you had the element of the character Billy, like having sex be associated with violence and trauma. So, like, one thing I'll say that this movie uses, and a lot of horror movies from the 70s and 80s and 90s and 2000s and Rob Zombie's films, they use sexual violence to escalate the stakes and to initiate things a lot. And I think a lot of times that's kind of, you know, this was made in a little bit older era, so in 84. But a lot of times to me that's a crutch to, you know, bring about strong reactions and to offend and, you know, test somebody's sensibilities. Because when Billy, essentially when he's in the Santa costume, you know, he's not happy about it. And then when he sees like his boss or supervisor, you know, at first like consensually kissing the woman that he's interested in, but then assaulting and raping her, that's when he snaps and kills, you know, his supervisor, and then he kills the girl too.
I mean, to be fair, you know, sexuality sets people off in a lot of ways, you know, in society. It is very much a thing that is used a lot in horror films, and a lot
Yeah.
of films, but it is kind of the, you know, a cornerstone of humanity
Well,
on some regard too, you know.
Too, in this movie, it wasn't used explicitly to titillate and entice. It seemed like it was part of the story.
Yeah.
And aside from, like, unfortunately, the two different sexual assault scenes, that's the only time there's nudity, and it's not really sexualized nudity. And
No, there's the woman who runs around topless the whole time in her house. Who's very just TNA
yes, okay,
heavy.
I forgot about that because I watched this and Terror Train and something else.
Yeah.
So some of this stuff kind of blurs together. So okay, that is
Yeah,
wrong.
she is basically just running around with the top on
So that-
until she gets killed.
That yes, okay, yes,
They
I'm
check
forgetting.
that box, don't worry. But
Okay.
yeah, it is handled in a way at first where it's just like, hey, this is some trauma this kid had to deal with.
Yeah, because if it had just left it
Yeah.
at those and not had the gratuitous, explicit scene, then it's like, well, at least there's a point to it.
I mean, the point of the TNA scene was obviously to sell more
Titillate.
tickets, hopefully. Yeah.
And yeah, but then like the actual kills themselves. So some of them, when Billy kills like his supervisor with like a string of lights, that's not very good effect. And then when he kills the girl that worked at the store that he was interested in, you know, it's relatively ho-hum. The more interesting kills are the later ones.
Well, he uses the bow and arrow also.
Yeah, bow and arrow to kill somebody.
Yeah. Yeah. The story, I think, is pretty well rounded up until he leaves the store because
Yeah.
you had been with all those characters.
Yeah.
And at that point, we're introduced to the random characters in the house, and you feel like, okay, this is just setting up fodder for Santa to go on a rampage.
Yeah, he literally just starts knocking people off.
And at least you got the interesting scene with that whenever the little girl, he's like asking her if she's been good, and she says, yeah, and he hands her the bloody razor blade, which that was a good scene, because that could have went either way.
And then you have the bullies that steal the sleds from the, teens. And then one of them goes down, and then the other one goes to go down, and it's his sled comes down with a headless body, and then the head comes down. So like that was at least interesting, and was something that you can point at. It's like, oh, that was a pretty good gag.
It was kind of like what's his name, Dick Halloran or whatever from The Shining, when he's walking down the hallways, and all of a sudden Jack Nicholson just comes out and hits him in the chest. I mean, that's kind of what he did out from the bushes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the story seemed pretty surprisingly focused for a slasher film of this 80. Again, up until the kills just kind of started going, but then it kind of comes back a little bit. And I also love how the police execute the Santa.
Yeah, they see the Santa. So like once he goes on the rampage, they assume that he's going to end up back at the orphanage that he was at as a child because of all the stuff that was going on. So they go there and they send the police there, and they see a Santa approaching one of the kids. And then, like, the cop jumps out and shoots and kills him because he doesn't stop. And it turns out it was somebody that worked there that was deaf, that obviously couldn't hear their warnings. So a little bit of darkness there.
Because the kids saw it too,
And two, a lot of times when you have movies that are Christmas horror films, you have movies that simply use Christmas as set dressing for a slasher, or you have a movie that attempts to deal with some of the either the mythology around Santa Claus, like we did that Rare Exports is more about the mythology around Santa. So you have movies like that. You have movies that are about the holiday season itself. And then you have movies that use it as set dressing. This is more of the set dressing because Santa is discussed as, he comes after, bad kids. But there's really no mythology to it. It's just, the grandpa saying that in a mental institution, and then Billy dressed in a Santa suit killing a bunch of people. There's really not any deeper meaning to it about.
Yeah, it's just his association with the character has been severely damaged, causing trauma. And two, like Better Watch Out, that is a film that is really kind of just dressing aside from, I guess it is maybe some comparisons to some other holiday films, but that one's really just kind of thematically is not about the holidays or
it's
like
mostly
that.
it's about other themes. It just happens to be set during the holidays.
Yeah, this film is, the imagery of Santa is just had an adverse effect on this man's psyche.
Yeah, because you could have taken, as weird or as kitschy as it would have been, you could have changed it from Santa Claus to the Easter Bunny or other like a pilgrim or Thanksgiving. You could have taken other holiday emblems or other figures, substituted it for Santa, and the movie plays about the same. It could have been that
it would have been kind of disturbing to see him in a giant Easter Bunny costume.
Yeah, or maybe if you set this during Halloween, it's that he was afraid of vampires or something, and this might dress as a vampire is the one that ends up killing his parents. So then there's some like one dresses as a vampire and tries to go around like biting people's throats out and stuff. So you could have done a movie that's about the same things happening, but like I think the more interesting approach is he works at a department store during the holidays, and just the general mood and way the general mood of all the customers and the way they treat people brings up all this past trauma and pushes him over the edge to then don the suit and go on the spree, as opposed to just he's in a Santa suit and then he sees like a sexual assault that triggers the memory. So
I think they did a really good job at kind of building things up.
Yeah, they
surprisingly well. They took time with that, I think.
Because like I said, the big difference between Silent Night, Deadly Night, and something like Friday the 13th or Halloween is it does give you elements of things to connect with the killer on, and it shows you what made him be what he is. On Halloween, at least the first Halloween and the second one, you really don't know why Michael Myers is doing what he's doing. He's just evil force that's doing it, so you really don't connect with him aside from the people who just want to see him kill teenagers in interesting ways. Jason, died as a kid and drowned and then comes back somehow. and I guess you could identify with like it being someone else's fault that he died, but you never spent any time with him to have any attachment. So it's mostly just, oh, what's the interesting way that he's going to kill these teenagers or young adults?
Yeah, I mean, they're boogeyman, not really characters. You know what I mean?
Like Freddy is somebody that nobody really identified with, but enjoyed because he became entertaining as the series went along. So this is one of the movies where it attempts to kind of, maybe in the mold of, Psycho or other things, like give you a little bit of glimpse into why somebody is what they are, how they act, and then you side with them a little bit. Maybe, or at least
you have a perspective on them, even if you don't side with them. You have a perspective on their story and kind of their journey and what led them there, which is, nicer than just having some random characters that are only there to be killed by somebody dressed as Santa.
And because like I won't name what it is because it doesn't really serve any point. Watching an independent film recently that was set around Christmas. And all it literally was just somebody in a Santa suit going and killing people a lot. And I didn't finish watching it because there was really no narrative threads to draw me in. And, the acting, all that stuff wasn't very great. So just having somebody dressed in a Santa suit killing people this day and time does nothing. At the time this movie came out in 1984, it was controversial. And it did, draw opinions from it. And I think even Ebert or Siskel and Ebert had mentioned it and talked about it as bad. So it did get negative attention, get pulled from theaters. So, from those, it provoked a response. And then there's also sequels to it that I think progressively had less to do with, I think they follow the younger brother and then go off in weird directions. And I think don't quote me on this. I'm pretty sure one of the sequels is the one where the guy says it's garbage day and shoots and kills somebody, like the historically bad death scene. But the overall movie, so the main character Billy has the younger brother, and at the end of the film, once Billy is dead, his brother looks at the nun and says naughty. So you get that he's on the same wavelength as his brother, and that Santa kills people who are naughty, and so you set up the sequels that then happen. But overall, it is interesting watching this, knowing there was the controversy about it in 1984. Because compared to some of those other movies, it's not any more extreme than any of them. It's just they use the imagery of Santa Claus for violence. And I get people being upset about that in the 80s, but at the same time, the legends around Santa Claus aren't exactly how he's portrayed in standard media. So I think that's just, the commoditization of something being turned into, if people link Santa Claus with the actual Christian holiday of Christmas, it's they're kind of missing the point. But to a lot of people, anything that is related to the Christmas traditions becomes linked to the overall, Christian meaning of it and what the holiday's about. So all that becomes commingled. And if you co-opt any of those elements and use it for something that's not a celebration of it, then you get attacked. And
I mean, Christmas is kind of, I guess was and is becoming less of so, but almost like just the sacred holiday. It's the one holiday when you're supposed to, it's about love and being with your family and friends. And it's okay, this is our moment. This is Santa. It makes everybody happy.
Yeah.
And then it's nope, Santa's killing people. So, you can see some of the reactions and why people had that, especially considering the reactions they had to many things at the time, metal music and, just tons of things.
Well, and too, a lot of holiday classics that people like, or I don't know, I want to call all these movies classics, a lot of holiday based films. So Home Alone, you go 10 degrees more in one direction, it becomes a horror film or a home invasion flick or whatever. Too, haven't you seen the video where somebody took Home Alone and added more gore into it?
Well, I mean, too, I think it's almost, I think a lot of the horror community fan base is starting to take over. There's starting to be a war on Christmas, I think, because even locally here, it's not surprising, but, the one haunted house had the Krampus celebration. Yeah. So they're starting a thing where basically it's kind of a new haunted house for I don't think it was only 1 weekend, right, or something.
Yeah, it's only 1 or 2 weekends.
So basically, it was just
Krampus.
Yeah, Krampus and horror themed around Christmas, which is a really cool idea to extend the life of that. But with all the Christmas horror films and everything, I think the horror fan base and community is really taking on Christmas now.
Yeah, well, and two, you have a lot of Christmas horror stuff because, even like people we know, so in Volumes of Blood, horror stories. So Nathan Thomas Miller, who's been on the podcast before, did a Christmas-based segment that Julie was in, and that was more about the holiday itself and things related to it, with like a twist. So that falls into the camp of like making a message or a point or something, and it was using the holiday to express something. And a lot of movies just take Christmas stuff to then show somebody getting killed by someone wearing...
because it is, there is
It's striking imagery.
Yes, yeah.
Because, the short film that we've been working on recently, or that Sean, you helped us film like a segment for, there's a little bit of Christmas stuff in it, but it really has nothing narratively due to the rest of it. It was just interesting lighting and something that like made sense to show like
you were putting it out for this season basically too.
Putting it out for the season is make note that was we shot a bunch of footage with no idea what would happen with it, and then formed a narrative around it to try to do something. So you can like using Christmas imagery to sell something. Like I'm not against it, but it's just like when it's brazenly used because there's nothing else to it. That's when I take issue with it. And like I said, with Silent Night, Deadly Night, there was more to it. Like they did have the link between like Santa, punishing those who are naughty, the things that happened to Billy's parents, reinforcing that to him and making him have certain beliefs and fears and all that. Like all of that does give them the movie's not just somebody in a Santa suit killing people.
It does feel like there was real effort put together constructing some sort of story, which I appreciate.
But then the parts that I forgot about the gratuitous topless scene, and then all the kind of random violence that occurs after it.
Yeah, I mean, it's par for the course for these films of that era.
So,
and even some of the ones now too,
So what's funny too is that was like a super controversial film when it comes out, or when it came out. Today, like I said, there's so much stuff nobody would care. And with the Christmas films, it's very tough to do anything new these days. So you have something like Better Watch Out that takes a different approach to that type of holiday. And then you have smaller stories about things. Like when I was a kid, it was always interesting to see the Christmas episodes of TV shows and movies and stuff. So I think a lot of times those little snippets can be fun because you have these characters you otherwise are aware of and know, and they have a story based around the holiday season. Kind of like the Halloween episodes are always fun too. But like the Christmas stuff, like, because there were other Christmas horror films that, like on the list, like there's not as many great ones as you would think, because it's most like horror films that are based on holidays are Christmas or Halloween. There are few. There's only a couple based on Thanksgiving, and it's really not about Thanksgiving. It just takes place during, aside from Thanksgiving, which is not something we really recommend. And
most of the major was have a flagship one. You know what I mean? Like.
Well, April's Fool Day.
Isn't Valentine's Day? What's the one set on Valentine's?
My Bloody Valentine.
Yeah, My Bloody Valentine. You have April Fool's Day.
Yeah.
New Year's Evil.
New Year's Evil, Terror Train, different movies like that. But like once again, Terror Train's not about New Year's. It just happens to be set during it. And then trying to think of other holidays. There's not real like 4th of July. There's not many horror films. So there's a lot of holidays, but the ones that have the real mythology around it, Halloween and Christmas, are the ones that get all the movies.
Yeah.
So Silent Night, Deadly Night. So it doesn't fall into the trap of just simply throwing, imagery around for no reason. So like on that aspect, give them some props. And it's, like I said, it's a cult film. It's not like on the level of a Halloween or Friday the 13th. It's kind of like on the lower tier. Probably down there with like My Bloody Valentine and other ones that, have cult hits and have had remakes that weren't super huge successes and that weren't super culturally relevant, but they were just out there.
I have kind of lost patience for watching bad slashers of that era. You know what I mean? Like I've seen enough of them, but
yeah, despite the love people have, most of them are bad.
Yeah. If you're just watching them and trying to see a quality film, it's some of them are hard to get through, but I think this ranks on the level of, it's worth watching, especially if you're interested in the history of slashers and you're just looking for a holiday themed one, that maybe isn't contemporary.
Yeah.
This one satisfied me enough to feel like it was worth a watch. And again, up until a certain point, I was kind of impressed by almost the dedication to storytelling, as weird as it sounds, to telling an actual story
and not
with this
just
character.
And not just doing the campfire retelling of 20 years ago this happened.
Exactly.
Wink, wink.
It puts you in the place of this character and kind of his journey, how he ended up running around in a town dressed as Santa Claus coming with an axe.
It does almost make you feel bad for him.
Yeah, absolutely. That scene is that scene is unpleasant, I think, in the beginning, which is surprisingly unpleasant.
Yeah, and too, like when Billy kills his first victim, the guy who was raping someone, you're like, I mean, honestly, at this point, he's not a bad person yet. He's just stopping something heinous, and because of trauma. But then he starts killing other people, and it's like, okay, well, now he's a bad person. But you at least understand why. And the fact that he gets kind of unceremoniously killed and doesn't come back, he's not like a supernatural killer or the kind of, person that just somehow can't be killed. It's like, it's more of a tragic story of somebody that had all this trauma and then got driven crazy because, their coworkers didn't know what was going on with them, and also didn't seem like great people to actually care about to begin with. So, like on the pantheon of 80s slashers, this at least is not like a direct copycat of Halloween or Friday the 13th or those other more popular films. And for that alone, like that, merits rewatching. Because like when you're looking through the different horror films, like I said, a lot of them aren't ones we really wanted to watch. Or other ones you've already seen. Because like a lot of like Gremlins isn't really horror, but it's got horror elements in it.
And you guys covered that before.
And we've covered that before. So you had like Gremlins, we've already talked about. There's other things like movies set in snowy locations like The Thing that you can watch during the holidays just because there's snow. But like in terms of like holiday movies, of course, like Black Christmas, which we talked about, like the original and the remake. But even then, Black Christmas really isn't about the holiday itself. It's just a setting, a backdrop for it. So there's Halloween, and then there's like Krampus, which is a more contemporary movie, and Better Watch Out, which we talked about recently. So there's stuff out there that you can watch that is different takes on things and not just schlocky, straight up,
trashy
rip-off
cinema.
So not that there's not trash in Silent Night, Deadly Night, but it's not the worst offender of that type of era. And to me, it's more of something like, as we mentioned before, like Blood Rage, the one that's set during Thanksgiving. 80s slasher, nothing spectacular in terms of the kills or the gore or the story, but like enjoyable enough. So with this one, like I guess we can give like our reviews on it. Like a score out of 10. It's kind of hard on some of these.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to stack it up against, like, again, what I said before, if you're looking for a Christmas themed horror film, especially if you look for an older one, it's worth watching. That's about as much as I can say for it. I don't know. You give it, a 5 or a 6 maybe, but like a 6 is kind of high, but also I'm giving it a break on some regards, just based on, it being a little unique and that being like a decently constructed story around that era. So there's a lot of caveats to that, but I think it's a fine throwback slasher. Yeah.
I mean, like being, probably slightly more positive in how I'm describing it than like a score, like a 5.5. Like it's, enough that if you're interested in watching a holiday based slasher or a holiday based horror movie, you can check this out. It's not really scary. It's just kind of the, character killing people type film. And it's like, because rewatching stuff like Prom Night, like that was kind of hard to watch when we did the review of that recently. And this was better than that and had more of a point to it than that. And it wasn't like a mystery based film or a whodunit or anything like that, because who the killer is and you're with him when he turns and starts doing it. So it's more of just going on the journey with the characters.
Which is the biggest strength of this film, I think.
And it's one of those things where if it was to be redone, because I know they did a remake, which I haven't seen, but I know it's generally poorly reviewed or received and haven't heard much about it. Like, it is an idea that could be revisited in a more modern context, strip away some of the extra elements you don't need, like gratuitous nudity and all that stuff, and make an interesting movie about it. But I think there's already been stuff that's kind of covered similar ground. But, so... on one of those 80s slashers that if you're interested in checking out, I guess we're tilting more on the positive and saying it's worth watch if you're wanting to watch something that's not happy Christmas stuff. You can watch that. So
if you're tired of those Hallmark Christmas films,
which are their own form of horror.
Yeah, I've been watching some of those. My wife's been watching. We've seen a ton of those recently. But yeah, it's like $2 to rent on Google Play, and so I don't think it's available to rent on Amazon for some reason.
Yeah, different licensing rights or whatever, but you can rent it or buy it cheap on disc. And I think too, I know like Shout Factory or Arrow or one of those has done like a recent re-release of like a Blu-ray. So if you're a fan of that movie, you can get good versions of it out now. And the transfer, like on the one I watched, wasn't bad. There was some footage that looked worse.
It was so weird. It was like, okay, this is a different, it's like they had a different stock of footage.
Yeah,
or something.
or like
for being standard definition, some of it looked really good actually.
Yeah. So it didn't have the terrible transfer of some of the movies, but so you can check that out. So if you're listening via iTunes, you can do us a huge favor, leave a review there. That helps other people find the podcast. If you're listening via YouTube, we always enjoy seeing comments, so keep those coming. Even if we don't respond to everything, we do read everything. Just sometimes get busy with stuff and forget to come back to it or anything like that. But if there are direct questions, we usually try to address those. But love seeing comments there. You can always send us an email at podcast@housebyvideostore.com. You can find all the stuff we're doing at housebyvideostore.com. Make sure to follow us on social media on Facebook, on Instagram, HBTVS_official, on YouTube, Twitter. And then on Instagram, I've tried to do more stories. I mean, I don't do them that often, but like we did some reshoots for the short film the other day, so I shared a story of that. So I want to try to get more into that. It's just finding time because there's so much stuff going on right now. But make sure to follow us on all those. And then if you want to find us specifically on the internet, you can find me on Twitter at William Caps. But I'd recommend following our official accounts because I use those probably more than my own.
I'm at Blevin Sean on Twitter. But yeah, check out those official accounts.
Yep. So that will bring this episode of the House by Video Store podcast to a close. Thanks for listening.
Merry Christmas.
Ho, ho, ho.